We're really delighted to have you here and to welcome you to Eurofound's 50th anniversary event here in Brussels, Competitiveness and Inclusion in a New Geopolitical Era, Prosperity for All. And that's a question. My name's Christina Arrigo from Eurofound, and before I hand over to our Executive Director, Ivailo Calfin, just a few little practical things. It's an in-person event. We have a photographer. We'll be recording this event, which you'll be able to watch afterwards. So please do let us know if you don't wish to be photographed or filmed. I also invite you to put your phones on silent, if that's okay. And we're going to be on social media, so please do engage with us. We hope you will be reposting, commenting, and again, we're really trying to engage in the debate. Our programme today begins with Ivailo. He's going to say a few welcome words. Then we're delighted to have Mario Nava, the Director General for DG Employment, here with us today. We'll show a short video marking Eurofound's 50th anniversaries, which I hope you will enjoy. And then we're delighted to have Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves, who is going to provide a little presentation to frame the panel debate that we're going to have. And we're delighted to have with 5 panellists who are going to engage in a lively discussion. And you look forward to that. And then we are delighted to have Paddy Smith, from former journalist, still a journalist, former Europe editor of the Irish Times, was a Brussels correspondent for a long time, and he'll be moderating the debate. Finally, we'll be welcoming Seamus Boland from the Economic and Social Committee for the concluding remarks, and then there'll be a light lunch outside for you. So with no further ado, Ivailo, I pass you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director General, dear guests. Thank you first very much for being here and for sparing part of your time for Eurofound. We'll try to make this morning as interesting and full with reflection, thoughts as possible. And I'm sure that with this excellent line of panelists that we have, it's going to be the case. I'm very happy to welcome here our closest stakeholders. I mean, the Commission's represented by the Director General for Employment and Social Affairs, Mr. Mario Nava, Jeroen Jutek, who is Director of Employment and a board member from the Commission side to Eurofound, and also the other colleagues from the Commission. I'm very happy that we have a very high representation from the social partners, from Business Europe and ETUC, Theresa de Liederkerke and Klaas Michael Staal. I'm also very thankful to our partners in the Parliament. Ms. Svetlana Penkova is first Vice Chair of the ITRE Committee at the European Parliament. These are institutions that are very close stakeholders of Eurofound, and we work with them very often. And I'm very happy also to see colleagues. Thank you very much, Cosmin, for being here, our sister agency, ELA, also being present here, and all the other friends, partners, stakeholders of Eurofound. We have a thought. I mean, if you look at the title of the conference, I mean, this year we have our 50th anniversary. We don't have too many cakes on this 50th anniversary. We thought it's healthier to speak about the work findings and what we produce, and that's a better show-up of this long history of the agency. So we are going to have another very interesting debate, which rounds around the concept of competitiveness with the concept of prosperity, job quality. We absolutely believe at Eurofound that this is not a zero-sum game. They are very much linked. I mean, this is not competitiveness at the expense of the working conditions or vice versa. Having a long experience in the research, including with very recent research on these topics, we can, with huge certitude, say that they are very much complementary. And if we want Europe to move ahead, there should be attention to all these aspects. What we see around us, this is a world which is changing very rapidly. We see that the redistribution and the reconfiguration of the world economic powers is underway. Different countries use different methods for that. Some use protectionism, some others use energy tools, some others use some specific knowledge in some straight sectors of the technology, for example, in order to gain more prominence in the economic distribution. Here, the big challenge of Europe is, of course, to keep up with the challenge and to continue producing a competitive economy, which is going to be very much one of the leaders in the world as it is now. This is doable. We look, of course, at Eurofound through the lens of mostly one of the production factors. This is the labor and labor supply. What we see in the last years, this is a huge increase in the jobs. In the last 30 years, there are about 30 million new jobs. We see a decrease of the working population with the demographic changes, 10 million less in working age, again, for the last 20 years. We see a shift which is very visible in the employment towards services. 2/3 of the European economy is already related to services. And this is something which, where Europe is lagging behind main competitors like the US in terms of productivity and increase productivity in services. But industry, and especially leading and disruptive industries, are also a very good potential for Europe. What we see also is that we have some excellent examples also of European companies and lots of potential, including with different supported programs for increased industrial capacity. Also, we see on the labor market a very clear sign of labor shortages. Which is not news. I mean, this is known to all of you. What we, when going deeper, and this is where the link between job quality and the labor market is, mostly these are in sectors that are less attractive for the workers. So, of course, it's very important to speak about skills, and this is one of the top priority in Europe about mobility, etc., etc. But one of the tasks is to make jobs in Europe attractive. So that we can attract talents also from outside the continent. So here is where job quality is important, not only for the well-being of the European citizens, but also for the competitiveness of the economy. We see also a general positive trend in terms of well-being and better social conditions. At the same time, we see some huge risks that have to be also on the monitor. The background of this general trend, we see that there are some pockets of marginalization in the social tissue of Europe. That might be regional marginalization, education-based, age marginalization, etc., which might lead to some very dangerous processes. It is very much supported and fueled by financial problems, by housing problems, by poverty. So all these are important areas where Europe needs to focus according, again, to what we find if we want to have a coherent society and supportive and political stability and supportive general public. So there are many things. I'm not going to go in details, of course, of our research, but this is a little bit a small, humble attempt to link these different aspects as digitalization, quality of life, we called it prosperity, role of Europe in the world. They are very much interlinked, and coherent policies are very important. This is what Eurofound is for. We are here to provide data, we are probably one of the richest bases of data and analysis in living and working in Europe. As they say for a Danish beer recently, probably at the end. But indeed, you can find lots of information about that, and we'll be happy to hear also the debate today around these issues. With this, I would like to introduce, and it's a great pleasure to introduce the Director General of DG Employment and Social Services of the European Commission, Mario Nava, who is one of these persons, not only with a long experience in the Commission, but one who delivers And you see, Mario, don't be surprised. I mean, look at the banking union, you look at different other achievements of Europe that are part of the career of Mario in the previous years. I'm sure that this is going to be also the case in the area of labor and employment and social policy. So for me, it's a pleasure, and without further ado, I would like to ask Mario to take the floor, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. I will be ultra brief because I need to leave 9:20. We have an important thing on digitalization of Social Security coordination. So I want to do two things, and I'll probably skip the notes. Apologies for those who wrote the brief. The two important things are, one, Eurofound is not a banal institution. It's really not banal for two reasons. One is exactly what Ivailo said, probably the richest database in Europe. The proof is that we have here Jeroen, but not only all the heads of unit, Natalie and all the others who have been working, for example, on the minimum wage directive or on the working conditions in the platform work. Even the work on housing is based on a recent work of Eurofound. So this is clearly a richness that we must use. And the second point is, again, what Ivailo said, is that here with us today, we have the board members. This is a tripartite agency, and I think this is absolutely fantastic. We have both Teresa and Klaus Michael, who are somewhere, I don't see them now, there, voila, both Teresa and Klaus Michael, and with whom actually yesterday we discussed the Commission working program. And I find, not only because I'm the Director General of Employment and Social Affairs, but I find that discussing with the social partner, the thing, it doesn't get worse. And it always gets better. And the third thing for which I really appreciate Eurofound is its ability, and probably this again is linked to the tri-party mechanism, its ability to adapt to what is needed. I mean, we needed, for example, to do a study on pandemic. It was delivered, the study on pandemic. Then housing became an important thing. That was delivered. And now is, as I said, being at the basis of that Russian war of aggression to Ukraine. We had something on the migrants. So I would say this is clearly something which is pretty unique. And honestly, we're very proud of our agency in Dublin. And I'm personally proud as Director General. I like the agency to work with us. I always say to them, for me, they are yet another directorate, basically. And I think that's exactly how it works. Then, on the theme of the conference and today, the theme of the conference is competitiveness and inclusion in a new geopolitical and prosperity for all. Now, the typical thing now to tell you is that competitiveness and inclusions are two sides of the same coin. You have heard it many times. And I want to give you an example. The example is very simple. Gender gap. When we discuss about gender gap, everybody is obviously shocked. The gender gap is very bad. We all agree. If we don't do nothing, the gender gap will transform into a pension gap. The gender gap means women work less. Maybe if they work the same, they earn less. They have period of interruption, first for the kids and then for the elderly to take care, and there is a big disbalance. Now, if you look at the root cause of the gender gap, the very first mentioned root cause is the one we all know, is that women, unfortunately, they carry a disproportionate amount of care duties for the kids, for the old, for everybody. And we men, we do much less. But this means what? This means that we lack people to do care duties. So it means that we would need more people in the care sector. Not for nothing, ELA publication shows that the care sector is the one most in demand. So the two sides of the same coin are here. We have excellent women, super well educated, that they could contribute a lot to the European economy. They can't because we don't have enough other people taking the care work, and therefore making sure that women could actually contribute. ESDE, it was mentioned, Eurofound is at the basis of our work. We have just published the European Social Development Report, and it shows there are about 51 million Europeans that are not working. The employment rate has gone up a lot, right? But still we have 51 million Europeans that could not work, and about 32 of them are women in working age. And as I said, the reason number one for them not to work, it's exactly the excess care responsibilities. So I believe this is a very clear example of the two sides of the same coin. What can we do for that? First of all, we, of course, have recommitted very recently to Porto to the European Pillar of Social Rights. Next year we'll come up with the new action plan. And in the European Pillar of Social Rights, there are 3 targets. Target number 1, employment. We are doing well. The objective is 78 by 2030. We are 76 point something today. When you granulate your data, you see that exactly we are doing well, except probably we have improved a lot in senior workers above 55, but where we are not yet doing well is essentially women and migrants. These are the 2 areas where we need to do better, and that's exactly what I've just said a minute ago. So that clearly shows where there is something to do. The second target is the target on skills, and how much people are being skilled, upskilled, and reskilled. We have a target of having 60% of the working force skilled every year, which basically means a course every 20 months of your working life. Doesn't seem a lot, but still is not yet reached. But of course, both with our own money of the ESF Plus and with a great effort by the industry, supplemented by the tri-party, by the social partners and all their help, I think we may be getting there. The big difference of the last 5 years is exactly been the involvement of social partners, but in general companies, into the upskilling and reskilling of workers. And then comes the third target, which is poverty. I just said that the employment rate goes up, but the poverty rate doesn't go down. So there is something which is difficult to explain, right? Even for economists who are always able to invent theories, but how can it be that the employment rate goes up and the poverty rate remains constant? The only explanation is that some of the work being created is probably poor. So the quality of that work being created is not big enough. Otherwise, for a greater employment, you would imagine a greater reduction of the poverty rate. That's why you have heard President von der Leyen talking about the Quality Jobs Act in the very recent State of the Union. Why? Because the Quality Job Act is exactly what links the fact that to greater employment corresponds a lower poverty, or if you want, a greater prosperity for all, which is exactly the title of the conference today. So I would say these are really the 3 areas where we need to work: the European Pillar of Social Rights, the Quality Jobs Act, and the anti-poverty strategy. Today at this conference, I think we have a great occasion. 50 years is always nice to celebrate 50 years. And so let's celebrate the 50 years, but let's also work together toward the next 50, of course, and understanding how all the work we do, without a very solid and analytical basis that Eurofound provides, will not be possible. So thank you very much from my side. Have a great day, and I hope to be able at some point today to come back to you. Thank you very much.
And now I think we are going to have our video. So enjoy.
We've been around for a long time. We've been around for 50 years.
Eurofound was one of the first agencies to be created, with the same tasks as we have today.
Indeed, that economic progress which we desire should enable us to raise our objectives in regard to the living standards and working conditions which we provide for ourselves. Briefly, it allows us to reflect on the quality of life.
Advances in new technology, shifts in cultures and values, increased competition, demographic changes, growing pressure for protection and enhancement of the environment. All these and many other factors have an impact on living and working conditions.
The work of Eurofound for all these 50 years was not only relevant, but we see a direct impact on the legislation. This is the knowledge, the time, the dedication, the motivation, the professional ability of many people that worked for Eurofound.
This long period allows us to have a very solid evidence base and provide trends.
You have to have reliable data. How do you build decades-long policies? How do you make huge investments in policies if you don't know what you're dealing with?
For 50 years, Eurofound has been a pillar of EU social policy, promoting and understanding social dialogue and collecting the evidence needed to develop policies. Its research on job quality, minimum wages, and working conditions has helped us to shape key legislative initiatives.
Eurofound provides research-based knowledge and evidence to improve living, working, and employment conditions in the European Union. We provide this research knowledge to policymakers across the European Union.
The Eurofound research not only is extremely good, but is also very credible. It acquires a center stage in any political debate.
It's a source of great pride for Ireland that Eurofound contributed so importantly to improvements in living and working conditions. Such a significant impact on the European project, on European integration.
Eurofound has contributed through its research to the gradual development of the European social policy. And of course, the tripartite setup of the organization has been a very important characteristic of the foundation.
One of Europe's superpowers is our ability to work together. And Eurofound replicates this. It brings together workers, it brings together employers and governments. We all sit at the table, talk about the real solutions, talk about really what the questions are that need to be researched.
Where I have seen for example, both the analytical capability and the tripartite nature of Eurofound be very valuable was post the 2004 enlargement.
For me, as a member of the European Parliament, the work of Eurofound is of great value when we work on improving the working conditions of Europeans. Your research and your workers' survey gives us empirical input on what we need to do as policymakers.
The recent work on the impact of artificial intelligence on working and living conditions and business performance is a good example of how Eurofound is producing up-to-date research that we will use for our initiative on algorithmic management and AI at the workplace.
I really would like to congratulate Eurofound for having already over 5 decades done excellent work. Congratulations how you adapt always to the changed necessities. So when we talk about working conditions, when we talk about everything in this field of work,
this is trying to understand the world of today and to create some fair conditions for all the citizens participating.
Climate and the climate transition, the climate crisis, precarity and working conditions that in many cases are not the best for young people. Eurofound can definitely help the European Union tackle some of these challenges.
At the moment, we're demanding quality jobs. There's a real value in Eurofound establishing how to measure the determinants of a quality job.
Eurofound notably is looking with good research on the trends in terms of the inactive parts of our society, then try to reconnect these people to the labor markets by having supportive policies.
Providing facts, but also communicating around the facts and making them more visible can help combat misinformation, I would say.
All our bright staff here at Eurofound is going to take up this challenge and make sure that Eurofound remains relevant in an agenda that ensures that Europe remains competitive at the global level.
We are happy to say that Eurofound is at a good place and ready to challenge also all the issues related with the future This is the result of all this dedication of each and every member of Eurofound over the years. I think we have to be proud of that.
Thank you very much. And now I have the wonderful pleasure to invite Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves to the lectern. Sandrine is Honorary President, Global Ambassador at the Club of Rome, co-author and Executive Chair of Earth for All. And Sandrine is going to set the scene for our panel debate. So Sandrine, please.
Thank you so much, and what an honor it is to be with you here on this 50th anniversary. I want to focus very much on your title, which is Prosperity for All, and to bring you through a bit of our own reflections, which started actually on our 50th anniversary at the Club of Rome, when we decided in 2022 to think a little bit about our original publication in 1972 of The Limits to Growth. And what did that look like for people's lives and livelihoods in the 21st century? And you can see that if you look at the original graphs already in The Limits to Growth, we had predicted deep tipping points in the 2020s, both environmental and social tipping points. Here in particular, you can see that in 2025, we're already seeing a real net shift in terms of industrial output, in terms of the impact on food and the environment, but also the shifts in population demographics across the globe. Now, what's important is that when we published The Limits to Growth, just a bit of time after, we also published that there are no limits to learning. And No Limits to Learning was a publication that enabled us to reflect on how, as a human species, we can continue to be critical agents within our environment, our social space, and think through what does it mean to be part of the human species in the century that we're in. Today, it really means that we have to think about the interconnected global instabilities, what we call the polycrisis effect, the interconnected links between the social system, the economic system, the global commons, and the political system. The fact that actually in many parts of the world, we're seeing growth in poverty and inequality, not actually wealth distribution in the way that we had hoped. That we're seeing a growing elderly population and demographic shifts, that sense-making is fundamentally disrupted by media. But in addition, we're seeing inflationary effects across the globe. We're seeing the way in which endemic economic insecurity is also having a direct impact, not only on people's lives and livelihoods, but also on growing mental illness or suicide rates. Short-termism and profiteering, and by the way, I come back from the United States, and I was there for that lovely speech that we saw from President Trump just 1 week ago, talking about the tariff and the trade wars and the way in which America is actually becoming increasingly more competitive, and yet very much demonizing, in many cases, the rest of the world. That has created globally, but also in many parts of Europe, polarization and distrust, a rise in nationalism, and the pullback from international cooperation, migration, including from climate change, and really this focus on short-term politics and knee-jerk reactions rather than long-term visioning and foresight. And of course, there is the compound effect of climate change and the impacts that we've seen both in terms of heat stress across Europe this summer, but also the direct impacts on growing floods. And we can see this in Spain today, the anxiety that is growing in that area. So why is this so important? Because there are a series, ladies and gentlemen, of deep elephants in the room that we need to unpack. And this is what Eurofound is so good at doing. It's looking at the interrelationships between the social system, the environmental system, and so many other pressures to better understand how we can have prosperity for all. It means we have to understand the role of the economy. And we at the Club of Rome and the many organizations that I work with fundamentally believe that it is time to move beyond GDP and extractive economics, because this is not servicing people's lives and livelihoods as we have an over-financialized economic system. Wealth distribution is actually going backwards, not forwards, in particular in the country that I hold the accent of, although I am French and Belgian. And I will show you some of those statistics. But in particular, this is linked to shareholder value. Our economic system is driven by shareholder value. It is not, again, in service of people, planet, or prosperity. Although in Europe, we are continuously trying to redress that balance. And we have seen that once again in the State of the Union address pronounced by President von der Leyen, in the links between wanting to continue to move towards a green revolution and to address our climate targets, while also addressing poverty, growth, inequality as fundamental elements of the social and environmental goals that we hold dear here in Europe. Climate and social discrimination is actually compounding the existing effects that we see in terms of wealth distribution. And human progress and well-being is actually declining. As you will see, for the first time, the UNDP has released its progress report demonstrating that we are not progressing in terms of human development globally. Social tension is therefore on the increase. Social tension then leads to a shift in political decision-making or the election of different governments, which may not create the political space for people and democratic enablement in that particular government. And that in and of itself is a problem when you also look at the cost of inaction, because then we see further compound effects between the social instabilities, but also the cost of inaction with regard to climate change and environmental impacts. And when I leave here today, I will be just walking to the Council to actually open up a new Council meeting on the new European Environment Agency report on environmental impacts, because we are in a planetary emergency. So while we are seeing actually stresses from a social perspective, we are also seeing that we are in the midst of deep environmental and climatic tipping points. To compound all of this, we are in the midst of what I call the morality gap. Governments that are starting to lead without actual leading for their citizens. Businesses that are only focused on profit and profiteering rather than on ensuring proper wealth distribution and being part of a broader community and economic system that services people. And that's what I call the 6 M's. And I do this to provoke, but I do believe that we need to reflect. Here in Europe, where we still have the possibility to have open conversations, to have critical thinking. Again, as I said, I'm coming from the United States, where many of my colleagues are quite frightened about speaking openly, where universities are being told that their funding will be retracted unless they do things in a certain way. It's very important that we look at these 6 M's, the fact that we're shifting some of our governments towards monarchies rather than democratic processes, that the focus on money over and materialism over the lives and livelihoods of people is encroaching into everything that we do. The focus on molecules, no matter what color they are, we are shifting away from green molecules, in particular in terms of fossil energy, in terms of shifting away also from fossil energy, brown energy, and also incumbent industries, mostly again in the United States. The focus on minerals, the focus on military, and of course the focus on media. How do we start to redress the balance? How do we start to address those elephants in the room when we're being told that human development is moving backwards? How do we address the impact on youth, again, coming from the progress report of the UNDP, of AI, of media, not only in terms of anxiety, but also the possibilities of jobs? How do we address the growing inequality the fact that from 1 trillion last year, we now forecast that with current trends, there'll be 5 trillionaires within a decade. And meanwhile, 3.6 billion people still live below the $685 poverty line. And that according to the World Bank, the number of people still living in poverty, around 3.5 billion, has barely changed since 1990, which points to exactly what Maria Nava was pointing to here in Europe. But this is the statistic that I find absolutely baffling. The fact that since 1978, US CEOs' salaries have increased by 1,460%, while employee salaries by 18.1%. Not to mention, of course, inflationary increases in most of the world. And that global billionaire wealth grew by 2 trillion in 2024, 3 times faster than the year before, equivalent to roughly 5.7 billion a day. And you can add to this, for example, the amount of billions per day of windfall profits made by the fossil energy industry and the fact that these billions are not being taxed. At the same time, we see a deep decrease in trust that is going up across the globe, but we see it obviously here in Europe as well. And this is because wealth distribution is actually going backwards, that the poorest 50% take less than 15% in total earnings, while the richest 10% take well over 40%. And that is encroaching, ladies and gentlemen, on the way in which we think about competitiveness. Because if we're thinking of big multinationals that are established either here in Europe or in the United States, they will continue to move towards CEOs that make the salaries that I was talking about previously. So how do we also then think about that link to climate? Again, that interconnected link between the social and the environmental, because we know that the poorest 50% are responsible for only around 10% of total lifestyle consumption. And this is where we need to think about responsibility. So what are CEOs saying about the social and environmental impacts that I have just shown to you? Well, 1 year ago, when we were looking at those social impacts and environmental impacts, we could see that in the top 10 risks, interviewing CEOs, those CEOs indicated that in 2 years, the highest risks would be both societal and environmental, including moving towards the 10-year period. But interestingly, in the 2-year and 10-year analysis done just this year, we can see a shift. Now, although the societal impacts have actually gone up, the green hushing has definitely increased. And we can see that CEOs have pushed the green and environmental impacts to the 10-year scenario rather than the 2-year scenario, but maintain the inequality, the migration, the erosion of human rights, and societal polarization. Although we do see, and this is what I saw last week in New York, that both diversity, societal, and green hushing are all happening at the same time. And the pressures on businesses are increasing. The other key issue that is not being addressed is the compound effect linked to the cost of inaction. The way in which the cost of inaction will have a direct impact on people's lives and livelihoods. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when we're being told that we need to ensure that we are competitive, when we're being told that we need to ensure that we keep rates of GDP going up, we are not taking into consideration the fact that already at 1.5 degrees, and we are pretty much at 1.5 degrees almost, we will lose 3% of GDP annually. That as we move towards 3 degrees, we can lose upwards of 17% of GDP. Hence, what we need to do is buffer GDP with new indicators that take into consideration social concerns as well as environmental concerns. because overall, we're seeing a net decrease in well-being. And this is, again, across the globe, less in Europe, but in parts of Europe we are seeing an increase, but definitely in the United States. Average well-being is going down as social tension is going up, and that is both due to GDP growth plus population growth plus climate change, and that is a great problem. This has been the analysis that we have undertaken through the Club of Rome and through Earth for All. And what's important is to then think about what are the risks for people. Not only their lives and livelihoods, but also the new social isolationism and loneliness. The fact that for the first time, the highest rate of youth death is suicide. So we have to address the way in which we look at all these compound factors and the impact on people's lives and livelihoods to understand the way in which we address prosperity. And that is why we undertook a system dynamic model. We took into consideration everything from life expectancy and GDP per person all the way to social trust and everything in between. And lo and behold, what we saw with our authors, economists and scientists, including Johan Rockström, my author in crime, was that the speed of action on planetary boundaries is a function of the speed of action on inequality and poverty. So in order to truly address greater well-being at the European level and at the international level, we need to address our environmental and social tipping points at the same time. And that is why that we know that through the analysis that we've undertaken, enhancing well-being and reducing social tipping points can be possible if we put in place real structural shifts within our economy, within our financial system, but also implement 5 key turnarounds. Looking at inequality, looking at poverty, ensuring that we look at empowerment to the point that was made by Maria Nava and the empowerment of women and gender, to ensure that we also address what we call the underbelly of our societies in order to thrive, not just survive, and that is our energy system and our food system, both in terms of clean energy and food systems, but also in terms of affordability and ensuring that all people have access to clean and affordable food and energy. And that we can actually achieve that well-being with what we call the giant leap scenario. And what's interesting is when we interviewed across the G20 citizens around what type of economic model did they feel they needed, most of them, 68%, said they wanted a well-being economy, an economy that serviced their needs, an economy that reflects prosperity for all. So ladies and gentlemen, my question as we enter into our conversation is, where do we go from here? Europe still has the highest quality of life factors. Europe is still anchored in respecting social, environmental values. And yet, competitiveness and at times the drive towards simplification could potentially unearth real changes to that system. Europe has to stand its ground to continue to honor its value-based decision-making, its knowledge-based decision-making, as we see the incredible role that Eurofound plays. And I hope that we will have an interesting exchange as we move into the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. That was a fascinating presentation. I think there's plenty to discuss there. So now I am going to invite Paddy Smith up to the podium and the panel. So we have with us today, I'm delighted, and I see we have, you sit down, you're actually all going to be mic'd up on, I think the technical colleagues will be coming to mic them up. So Paddy, please sit down there. Then we have, I'm delighted to have with us Svetlana Penkova, an MEP from the European Parliament. Thank you very much. We're going to call on Maria Jepsen, Eurofound's Deputy Director, who's here. We are delighted to have the social partners with us. We have Therese de Liedekerker from Business Europe and Klaas Michael Staal, the Deputy General Secretary from ETUC. So I think they're just going to get mic'd up quickly and we will get started on the panel. And I'll be handing over to Paddy.
Do you want me to go
To the end.
Right, well, I hope you can hear me. The function of this debate really is to discuss the general themes that are brought up by Eurofound's 50th anniversary, a turning point not only for the organisation, I suspect, but for definitions of its work. And so I wanted to ask the panellists to give us first their introductory comments, perhaps, on the general themes that are being raised today. And then we'll go back and take up maybe individual themes that have arisen from the presentations that have been made today. So I'll ask first Klaas Michael Staal, who's Deputy General Secretary of the European Trade Union Congress, to introduce us briefly.
Thank you. And yes, great to be here, and a very fascinating introduction as well. So I'm a bit blown away in some senses, but it do echoes a lot of the things I was intending to have here as a bit of an opening remark, and that is that we are in fact in a very stressful situation geopolitically, but also in terms of what I would call shared reality. Because a lot of our post-war institutions are under pressure. The European Union, political parties, and so there is a lot of pressure on these post-war structures, and the situation is dramatic, just as was pointed out. So that's important. But I think it's very important to look at what makes compromise possible, what makes our societies possible, what makes democracy possible. And I think it's three things at the end of the day. First of all, a shared reality. We have to have a shared understanding of what are facts, and so on. And that's where Eurofound plays a very important role and a very important function. And I'm sure Therese can also witness to that, because we've had a lot of use of the work that Eurofound has done, and in our work preparing our social dialogue program and so on. We need to have shared institutions. That's the second one. We need to safeguard and protect those institutions. Let it be political institutions or trade unions, but also employers' organizations, to be fair. It also matters a lot, and that's the third front, I think. It's also how we think and how we act. And I think that the work of Eurofound is very important in all of these factors, because you help us to find a shared reality. What are the facts underpinning the challenges on our labor markets? Secondly, as institutions, we are supported by the work that you're doing, and not only us as social partner. I also think that the legislators at European level is supported. And it also helps me to orient myself in this time where everything seems to be challenged, even basic facts. And I always found it astonishing when the American president, Donald Trump, was elected the first time. And you remember this. It was just absurd at the time. And he said that he held a speech at the Capitolium, and he saw millions of people. And everyone could see it was not millions of people. It was not more people than Obama won the election. And it was raining. He said it was not raining. And he was just, and just very basic facts. And I think it's important at this time, and I would stop here as an introductory remark, to safeguard a shared reality. Also, when you don't agree, and Therese and I, we do not agree on everything, that's for sure. I'm sure we're going to get there. But it's very important that we understand on what we disagree. And Eurofound is a very important actor to ensure that we know how we disagree and to help us to orient in this. I will stop there now because I can continue and I don't want to make a full presentation.
Well, the other half of social partnership is employers, and Therese de Liedekerke is Deputy Director of Business Europe, and perhaps she can give us a slightly different perspective.
Well, I think on what Klaus Michael just said, I will not give you a different perspective, because that is the portion of the shared reality we are talking about. And I will also start by expressing my gratitude to the work that is done here at Eurofound, because it is providing us with a basis of intelligent and nuanced research on issues on which the employers and the workers' sides have to work together in order to help finding solutions, so that our economies and our societies in Europe, and that's a very important feature of our European model, can continue to ensure that economic and social progress goes hand in hand. Because economic progress is not the enemy of social progress. On the contrary, it's the basis of social progress. I found it very interesting that in the introductory presentation, you had as the first title, People, Planet, Prosperity. Business Europe, prior to the last cycle of the last EU institutional cycle, so for the von der Leyen I Commission, had, as we always do, defined what we thought should be the agenda for the European Union in the years to come. And our slogan was prosperity, people, planet. We put prosperity first because this is the basis in Europe to be able to invest in preserving our social model and to invest in environmental protection. And what I find very positive is that in the von der Leyen II Commission, they are picking up on this. And their renewed focus on competitiveness is not geared towards competitiveness for the sake of it, because this can never be the case, but it's for an intelligent competitiveness that will allow us to continue to invest in generating prosperity so that we can invest in our social and environmental goals. And I think that it's very important when we look forward to what needs to be done and when we debate what needs to be done in order to deal with the enormous challenges that are facing us, both within Europe and outside Europe, because part of the challenges are challenges on which we have little control. It's the reality of decisions, elections, different ways of seeing the world that are happening outside Europe, but where we do have a say and where we can work together as employers, as trade unions, as public authorities, in how do we put our own European house in order so that we can actually face the difficulties and the challenges that are rising and for which a thriving economy are absolutely essential. And I'll stop there for that introduction.
Thank you. And Maria Jepsen is Deputy Director of Eurofound, and I wanted to ask her to speak a bit about the major report which the Eurofound has just produced on European working and living conditions, and the fact that really we are now looking at a much broader definition of working and living conditions, and it was really a fascinating insight, not just into work but life in Europe. So, Maria.
Thank you very much, Paddy. So maybe this my answer back will kind of link a little bit the discussion about competitiveness and well-being together. some of the reports that came out lately from Eurofound, Ivailo mentioned that we've generated 30 million jobs over the past 3 decades. And that despite a retracting working age population, which is a formidable achievement. We've not only generated these 30 million jobs more, but we've actually, while generating these 30 million jobs, upgraded our labor market, meaning that we've gone from a more low-paid economy towards a higher skilled, higher paid labor market. So that is a really, really formidable achievement. Now, this has not been a linear process. It has not been achieved across all the member states, but it is a general trend of upgrading labor markets, but also while upgrading labor markets shifting much more towards the service economy, as Ivailo said. This has been mostly achieved by the integration of women in the labor market, increasing the employment rates of older workers, but also integrating migrants in the labor market. So even though we still have employment gaps, clearly, like stark employment gaps, we have come a long way. So that's the quantity and a little bit on the quality. But if we really go into kind of more granular on what's going on the job quality, there we again see a fairly positive result. And I think that what Barbara Gerstenberger said last week was we actually have good news. So, and you know, these days good news are scarce, right? So the good news is that job quality has, over the past 10 years, 15 years, actually improved. But slightly more so for men than women. So while women have really integrated into the labor market, they have maybe been less able to gain in terms of job quality. So I think that is really an area to watch out for. Maybe what I'm wrongly formulating as men have better been able to increase their job quality than women. So, and especially with regard to social environment and with regard to work intensity, that we see a little bit of attention there. But on the physical environment, we have clearly a better work environment today. Working time quality has clearly increased, especially since the pandemic. The skills and discretion, which is an extremely important element in the competitiveness agenda. Here again, we see a lot of increase with a lot more training going on within the companies, which basically maybe reflects the stark transitions that we're going through in terms of demographic, climate, and digital transitions. Prospects have improved. We have a buoyant labor market, so this is reflected. And earnings, we have a lower proportion of people that find that they are not fairly paid. So all very good news, but, and here's my point, we can get back to it afterwards, is that while a lot of the workforce has been able to gain from this, we still have about 18% in the labor market, 18% of workers in the labor market that fare really bad in terms of job quality, that fare really bad on the 7 indicators that I just mentioned here. And these are concentrated on lower skilled, youth, transport, health. So groups of workers we know are having difficulties in the labor market, but when you look at the job quality, we really see a very stark contrast of their job quality compared to the remaining of the labor market. The good news is that we, for the first time, now have a group of workers, which is another 20% in the labor market, who fly very high on these 7 indicators. And this we have never seen before. So meaning that we can actually have what we call a good job. This is important for competitiveness because we know that job quality is intrinsically linked with well-being, with health, with engagement, with motivation, which are all factors that contribute to having a productive, learning, and innovative workforce. And the higher job quality there is, the better the well-being, the more engagement, the higher the motivation, and the healthier the workforce is. And that helps us, hence, to engage in becoming more productive and more competitive. But we still have this group of workers, which is like nearly 1/5 of the workforce, that have fairly dire working conditions, that are not able to participate in the same way. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. I'd ask Svetlina Penkova, who's Vice President of the Parliament's Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, to bring a parliamentary perspective on the discussion.
Perfect, thank you, Patty. That's a relatively broad question, but I will try to focus on like three main areas which are the core of our policies in terms to achieve the goals we are setting ahead of us here today. So first of all, I will start with the economic growth, which is, of course, key if we want to be discussing the job quality and to be discussing the opportunities for young people to find their opportunities and path forward in our union. So when we're speaking about economic growth, probably there are two main areas which we still find challenging, in which we need to put a bit more effort into developing further. One is the SMEs. Because in the last few years, we've seen that the SMEs, I'm sure you've heard that quite often and probably too much in the last few years, they're the backbone of the European economy, employing more than 90 million people across the Union, which is more or less about 65% of the labor force in the Union. So we really need to pay special care and special attentions about guaranteeing the future and protecting our SMEs, especially in terms of crisis situations. The second component in this matter is startups and scale-ups, because those would be the drivers of innovations. And this is one of the core focuses since the last mandate in the European Parliament of our committee now, because this is a segment of the economy which is still not part of the legislative framework, and without having a proper legal entity or proper definition, it's very difficult for those small entities to actually survive or exist in the EU. Hence, usually our young entrepreneurs are trying to find their future somewhere outside of the Union just because of better legislative framework or better access to funding. So when we speak about the first point I said I'm going to raise SMEs and startups, there is still a lot to do in terms of policy framework. The second one, of course, we've touched upon quite often today, is the competitiveness. I'm going to try to add a bit of a different spin speaking about competitiveness here. So when we speak about competitiveness, we often think about industry, industrial growth, industrializations. Those are some of the key aspects, and we've been touching upon as well in many of the policies coming from the European Parliament and the European Commission recently. I'll add the spin here of the energy as well, because energy union is as much important as the industrialization when we're speaking about competitiveness. Just think about it. When we're speaking about the EU competitiveness, the first issue we need to resolve at the moment is to actually ensure that there is no competition among member states. If we want to be truly building a competitive EU industry with like high quality well-paid jobs, we really need to resolve the first level, which is competition among member states. And at the moment, believe it or not, member states are competing on one of the basic resources when we're speaking about industrialization. This is the energy and electricity prices. So that's why I'm saying the first step to start moving towards a real competitiveness of the EU is to create a properly functioning energy union by connecting the electricity grid system within the EU. And last but not least, I'm just going to mention innovation and research, which is key if we, I wouldn't call it probably the last step in all those priority lists I've said, because it's very difficult to prioritize everything I've been speaking about. The innovation and research is, of course, key if we wanna be speaking about prosperity and future of the European economy and the European labor market. I'm just gonna mention one very big achievement of the EU, which it is big achievement at the moment. However, it was done with very much of a delay, I would say. In 2023, the EU finally established and introduced the unitary patent, because until then, it was not existent. So it was almost impossible for our entrepreneurs to protect their innovation or their technological advancement across our union. So since 2023, since mid-2023, we already have the unitary patent, which only for 1 year showed a reduction of more than 30% in the cost of SMEs or innovators that wanted to protect their technologies or their innovation. And it also showed more than 40% of application increase from innovations coming from SMEs and universities. So those percentages are also, like it's very difficult to measure that, because if we didn't have it before, like on what basis it is, but it's like on the average amount of those patents across the union before that. So we are doing the steps. However, we really need to be moving faster if we want to catch up in this global competition we're entering now. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So now what I want to do is I want to throw the discussion open to the floor and talk about specific themes that emerge from this. And perhaps just to be provocative initially to start off the discussion, I want to say that in preparing for this, I'm struck by the way competitiveness has become common language of all of the parties involved, from Eurofound to the Commission, to employers, to trade unions. It's like being against sin. It seems to mean everything and nothing in a sense. And I just wondered, maybe I'd ask Klaus Michael, is the competitiveness that you're talking about and that unions are talking about the same as the competitiveness that Therese is talking about, and how do you bridge that gap?
I was a bit. Thank you for that question, because I don't think I agreed with anything you said on competitiveness, because I don't believe that countries compete in that sense, because that means that if Germany is trading with France, it will be a minus for each or any one of them, which is not true. Companies compete with each other, but that's a different setting. So the whole framework of discussing competitiveness as countries and as a continent, I think is wrong. Having said that, yes, we can talk about competitiveness, but we do have to talk about what underpins competitiveness. And I think we have had very good conversations and discussions in the lead up to our work program, because we agreed on a couple of challenges and problems. For example, that we need to have higher participation on our labor markets. We agreed that we need more high productive jobs, and I think we probably have different views on how we achieve that, but for us, it's addressing the problem of quality jobs. How do we ensure that we get more and better jobs across Europe? How do we address inequalities? And how do we address precariousness and many other questions? So that underpins competitiveness. So in order to be competitive, we need more social, and Therese will probably say more economical. But that's the fight we're going to have, huh?
Well, one of the things that you want is more legislation.
Yes.
And
not per se, not for the sake of itself.
Obviously, but you are complaining that the EU has failed to do a number of important legislative measures at the moment. Therese, you don't agree with that at all.
Well, we believe that Europe has already highly developed social legislation. We're very proud of the European social model, but we also believe that it needs fine-tuning and constant adaptation, because the world for which it was shaped is changing all the time. So I think having a conversation constantly on how to adapt our social model means that our social model is alive. And to come back to your initial question, I think that's the big difference between us two is a bit the chicken and egg discussion. Klaus Michael probably believes that social policy is the basis for European competitiveness. We always insist that the basis for European competitiveness is the work that companies, so the entrepreneurs in Europe, are doing together with their workforce, and that therefore the economy is the basis for financing the social model. But at the end of the day, I think that there is some truth in what we are both saying. Because the fact that we have those safety nets in Europe is, of course, doing a service for risk-taking entrepreneurs. Where we will need to do the fine-tuning is where the safety nets have translated into risk avertiveness. And that's where then you need to look and do at how you do the fine-tuning. So I would narrow down the difference of views between us as the sort of what comes first, the chicken or the egg.
But your priority is simplification of legislation taking the burden off business.
Our priority is to get rid of excessive burden. So we are not advocating wild deregulation. We are advocating tackling the excesses of regulation that have characterized, in particular, part of the last cycle at the EU level, where in a situation where a lot had already been regulated at EU level, one has started to try and add on an extra layer which very often was entering in territory which was not of EU competence. And in order to overcome that difficulty, the European legislator has sometimes, instead of creating clear and simple rights and obligations, has started to invent all sorts of very sophisticated and burdensome reporting requirements, which are diverting companies' resources from their main job, which is basically to make sure that they produce products and services that serve society at competitive prices. And nowadays, more and more companies have to devote resources to purely administrative tasks linked to reporting requirements, which have been, in particular, highly produced during the last cycle.
Sandrine, can I ask you to come back on that? I know that you feel that deregulation is often a code for reversing social progress. How do you see this debate?
No, absolutely. And I would say that, and the reason I brought in so much, I wanted to take the macro level and to see what's happening across the globe, is that I fundamentally believe that the European model is under threat. And we need to be careful of what we wish for. And the reporting requirements is a perfect example. Because actually, I think most European agencies, both on the employee and employer side, all companies and advisors to the European Commission have said, absolutely, we need to simplify. But there's a difference between simplification and deregulation. And so we have to be careful what we wish for. The Trump tariff scheme now indicates that actually Europe has to simplify and even abolish reporting requirements for US companies if they want to continue to have their 15%. We have just lost our greatest competitive edge by actually having strict criteria in terms of reporting. And I think it's really important that we're careful, that in pretending that we're moving towards competitiveness, we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So the most important thing that we can do is absolutely ensure that we're moving towards a single market that is fluid. I agree that we want to reduce competitiveness within Europe's single market in order to enable affordable and clean energy and other goods and services to thrive. But we have to be very careful that our version of competitiveness becomes an American version of competitiveness, or a fear that we actually need to scrap the European model in order to properly compete. And that, I'm not saying you said that, Therese, at all, because you didn't. I'm just saying we have to be careful not to actually move into that trap.
Svetlina, I'd ask you to come in on that too, but one of the things that strikes me in this discussion about competitiveness is precisely the point that's made about internal competitiveness within the Union and external competitiveness vis-à-vis the US or whatever, and how does that impact on the debate?
I'll go back to basically answer to the challenge in terms of like companies compete, not countries. I'm really surprised because probably if you've said that 5 years ago, I wouldn't be having any arguments or any examples to contradict you. But at the moment, what we see is definitely in a situation when you have resource scarcity and geopolitical uncertainties, it's definitely a moment when countries compete among themselves, not only companies. But the point I was trying to raise was especially, as Sandrine also touched upon, in terms of the internal competition among member states, which I really think it should be reduced. And I gave a very, very clear example with energy, and I'll clarify it furthermore so we don't misinterpret anything. So here we're not really speaking about industries or companies competing among each other. When we're speaking about countries competing on the electricity prices, the example is very simple. At the moment, we have a union which is not well connected when we come about electricity infrastructure. Like I'm speaking about the grids. No wonder the next big legislation which is coming to the EU is exactly the electricity grid. So you have member states, which I'm not going to name, A and B, that have very much lower electricity prices. So their industries are doing well. They're not suffering from the highest prices of one of the main resources for their production. At the same time, you have other 10 member states that have 10 times higher electricity prices. And we end up in the situation where we want to connect the grid to make sure that the energy prices, electricity prices are more or less the same across the Union. And we face the opposition for member states A and B. Isn't that a competition of countries that want to protect their industry? And this is a massive disparity that we need to resolve if we are going to enter to the second stage of actually having the EU economy as a global competitor on the scene. That's what I meant. I didn't mean to challenge the basic economic principles of what's competitiveness. I'm just saying in this specific current situation, there are aspects which we need to acknowledge that could be resolved via a bit more clear, stronger regulations to a certain extent, given the unique geopolitical situation we're at. If it was normal and peaceful state of the world, as it was like probably a few years ago, I completely agree. We would be looking at companies and industries competing. But at the moment, we have a very, very special case. And we need to address it within Europe.
Talking about addressing it within Europe, where we've recently had the speech from the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in which she spoke of enhancing the quality jobs roadmap. Now, as an ignorant person, what is the quality jobs roadmap, and is this a good thing? Klaus Michael, sorry.
So yes, I will respond. I just want to come back. I don't want to leave the competitiveness just yet, because I think it's an important discussion, and we're not having it in depth. So I'm very happy that we're having that discussion right now. And I also think that there's a very dangerous dynamic applying competitiveness as to countries, because it's a dynamic that brought us into conflict historically, created the conditions for what is the European Union today and the extended cooperation that we have today. And playing around with these words is also playing with fire. So it's also about adjusting the level of conflict. And for anyone who have read Carl Schmitt, you also know that there is a very big concern of getting the conflict level up to animosity, and that's exactly what happens in the United States. So while applying this terminology, I think we have to be very careful. So that's why I say take it easy, because yes, there is competition, but there's also competition to ensure that there are certain conditions. So I just want to say that. But yeah, to just comment on the Quality Jobs Act is a very important thing, because we're talking about ensuring that people feel that Europe has something to offer for them. I meet with people from all across Europe, trade unionists saying, what's in it for us? Why should we be supporting the European Union and all of the work that's happening there? Because there's nothing happening for us. And the Quality Jobs Act is a very important tool to ensure that there is something happening also for working people across Europe, bringing Europe to them. So that's that. And then there are real issues to address as well. And I think the Quality Jobs Act will address some of the issues that Maria mentioned in her contribution on the group that fall outside of it.
Therese.
Just want to come back also very briefly before going into the quality job debate on the competitiveness versus competition debate, because I think we are mixing up two different notions here. Competitiveness is by definition an external notion. You compare yourself to people who are actually doing the same thing as you, and you're trying to measure whether you're doing this more efficiently than them. Competition is what happens on markets with certain rules of the game. And we have in Europe a single market with rules of the games, very clear ones, who organize the fact that you can compete fairly within this single market. And indeed, when there are unfair ways of unfair competitive behaviors, they need to be pinpointed and addressed. When it comes to the energy issue, some countries have made more intelligent energy policy choices than others and are rewarded for it. I see nothing wrong with it. This is, on the contrary, a source of inspiration. But then Europe is big, and you have some countries who have, for geographical reasons, have very specific difficulties. They're sort of energy islands, not well connected to the rest of the system, and that's where your energy union point and grids and interconnections become so important, because then if you solve that, you're actually improving the energy efficiency of the European Union as a whole, and at the same time improving competition conditions throughout Europe. So chapter competitiveness and competition closed. Now to the job quality one. I'll come to really my obsession in this debate, and I think there is a divergence of views between us on how to approach the issue. In our view at Business Europe, the quality jobs debate is indeed a crucial debate, because Europe has to compete on innovative product of services, which means has to compete on quality jobs. But the future quality jobs roadmap has to be about making sure that you create the conditions that will optimize, maximize the creation of quality jobs in Europe. In other words, to continue the progress that Maria alluded to, but also going even further so that we can capture the 20% of people who are not benefiting sufficiently from this progress, and making sure that they can also be part of the drive upwards towards the creation of quality jobs. So it cannot be a social policy debate only. It's first and foremost a debate on innovation policy, economic policy, and social policy is part of it, but it's only one ingredient in the quality jobs debate. And this is, I think, the big difference between us. We don't think that you can legislate your way through quality jobs. You need to have safety nets in order to make sure that there is fair competition, including among people who pay social security contributions and respect labor laws. But you cannot legislate your way through the creation of quality jobs, because you can not legislate the creation of jobs, full stop. So that's the difference.
So in a sense, what we're saying, the Commission, in emphasising this particular issue, is taking one side of the argument maybe, and saying, well, the legislative stuff is less important, and we're not so much bothered with the working time directives or similar progress. It's a shift in emphasis by the Commission in terms of its approach.
that, I think, time will tell, because for the moment we don't know what the Commission will put in its quality jobs roadmap. We will have to see what they put in it at the end of the day. But from our perspective, it cannot be a race to the front for more legislation, because this will not facilitate the creation of quality jobs in Europe. It will, on the contrary, hamper the creation of quality jobs in Europe.
Can I take the discussion on a bit and go back to an issue that you raised, Maria, and particularly the gender gap and the information that came from the working conditions report on the persistence of a gender gap. How do you see that discussion evolving?
I think that at the European level we have the gender equality strategy and think that there's been a lot of headway been done with regard to closing down the gender gaps, but there's still a lot of gender gaps that kind of persist and remain. We continue to have, despite the fact that about 2/3 of the jobs that have been picked up over the past 30 years have been picked up by women. And we got an extremely segregated labour market, both sectoral and occupational. And that plays out when we look at the working conditions, okay? So the fact that we have segregated labour markets plays out to the fact that we continue to have high wage differences, and we continue to have differences in job quality. I guess that when we talk about competitiveness and growth and sustainable growth, a lot of the service sectors that will continue to grow are completely female-dominated. And as was raised earlier today, especially in the care sector, which is maybe an example we can take, the care sector is predominantly populated by female workers, and what they do is predominantly alleviate other female workers or non-workers from informal care responsibilities. Now, in the care sector, we know we got huge labor shortages. We know that we're going to have growing needs, and we need to figure out how we can turn the care sector into a service sector that provides productive jobs that provide high quality services. But when we talk about creating a sector that is productive and provide quality services, we need to look at who's going to provide it, and that would be the care workers. And if we have care workers that have fairly dire working conditions in terms of pay, in terms of autonomy, in terms of skills, it's very difficult to combine this need for a productive and high quality service sector with a workforce that has dire working conditions. So you will need to tackle the working conditions in a fairly profound way to be able to match kind of the aspirations for this care sector. And that's where I think the competitiveness or maybe it's more productive in competitiveness maybe in a softer way, and job quality comes really well together. I think the care sector is a beautiful example of how you need to work on it, and how in terms of improving the working conditions on a lot of different factors, you will get a better care provision, you'll get a more productive care provision, and it will have a lot of spillover effects on other factors like the health services more generally, as you'll probably get people faster out of acute care, less into acute care, and so forth, and you will be able to have high-skilled women enter into better matching occupations. And that is a very, very gendered question, right? So you need to look at what are the factors that create the more dire working conditions in the care sector and tackle them head on. But these issues spill over into all that kind of more general problems with regards to your working conditions for women elsewhere. I mean, the working conditions for women have improved, but the work intensity for women have increased. But that's also because they are engaging into sectors where work intensity is increasing. Okay, like sales, client-facing occupations, and the social environment comes with this again. And once again, it's client-facing occupations in the care as well, whereas social adverse behavior is on the rise, and that's maybe just a kind of a general factor in the society. So in that sense, are we having less discussions on gender gaps? Could be, but we don't have a choice. We need to have them if we want to move forward.
Sandrine.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in that Tim Jackson, actually, who wrote Prosperity Without Growth, has just come out with a book on the care economy and has very much demonstrated that the growth in jobs in the care economy is so notable, in particular as we move towards an AI economy, which will actually create the opposite effect, potentially, that we need to think about creating the care economy as part of the existing economy. So ensuring that it's not a parallel economy and fully integrated into the existing economy. But this comes back to a point that we have not addressed, which is our existing economy predominantly is only focused on GDP growth and does not actually have proper indicators to think about either the care economy or even empowerment of women. So we do need to, and this comes back to your point, around we're in a Bretton Woods system of an economy that was created post-war that no longer reflects the 21st century. We can talk about job creation and the economy linked to competitiveness until the cows come home, but without understanding the structural issues that we have in our current economy, we're not going to get to where we need to go. That's the first point. The second point is we do, however, have to hold a space for the growth in the MAGA obsession. And I say this because it's predominantly in the United States, but it's coming over to Europe, which is that we have a growing disenfranchised young male population that is moving us towards populism in many cases in terms of the voting behavior. And so as much as we talk about the gender gap, we need to hold some space for a proper conversation around young men who are actually not getting employed, who could potentially, with the AI shift, also get less employed. Many young men who are coming out with digital experience are actually being replaced by AI right now. So we need to think about this. So this is a trend that we have to hold at the same time as we understand the gender gap.
Yes, I was going to come on to the digital revolution and the effect of AI in a sec, but did you want to say anything about the gender gap?
I think most of the matters were covered, and I'm very curious in terms of what Sandrine had brought up as a point, because this is not to be neglected as well.
Well, perhaps then we can touch on the effect of the digital revolution and AI, which are perhaps the biggest qualitative changes in the nature of the workplace since Eurofound's earlier reports. And it's very interesting. We're talking about changes not only in the amount of working at home, the effect of AI on management, the introduction of a thing which I'd never heard of before called algorithmic management, the fact that we're spending our time sitting down all the time, all of these things are changing the nature of work. And are we responding? I don't know. Klaas Michael.
Oh, that's a big question, huh? What I think we can see from a trade union perspective is of course, that the effects and the consequences of introducing a new technology is very different depending on where you are in the economy. So if you look at what happened in the transport sector or in a warehouse or in a hospital, will be very different consequences for the way that we work. One of the big concerns that we're having is, of course, the fact that there is no human at the end of the day making very important decisions, either on hiring, potentially also on firing people, and all of that needs to be addressed, of course. But it's definitely a big transition that we're looking at, and we're probably just in the beginning of it, and we need to address these core issues jointly.
Therese, is business going to address these issues without prompting? Is it something that is naturally part of the dynamic of business?
We have to. I mean, this is absolutely part of the dynamic of business. And I would like to plead also for, again here, going a bit deeper. Digitalization is one thing. AI is just one form of digitalization. There are many other forms of digitalization. So not everything which is related to digitalization has to do with AI and algorithmic management. Secondly, the European Union has just adopted an AI Act, which precisely foresees that you always have to have this human oversight. So that is, of course, something which is important. From an economic point of view, there is a point of concern that if you look at the performance of Europe in companies who are at the forefront of digital innovation, there are very few European companies. And when we have startups starting in Europe, normally when they scale up, they move out of Europe. And that is an issue which needs to be addressed. And it has partly to do with the excessive regulation I was referring to, when basically the safety net translates into risk advertness. And so that is something we need to look at and to see, because if we want to continue to make sure that digitalization and AI is developed with this human-centric approach that is the European approach, it is very important that European companies are at the forefront of this innovation and that we don't put obstacles to that.
Are you saying that social media companies should not be forced to police their own content?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we need to look at all sorts of issues which have nothing to do with the legislation on digitalization, but which mean that all startups don't scale up in Europe. And it has to do very often with legislative requirements which have nothing to do with the digital legislative requirements. It's about excessive application of the precautionary principle, which basically means that risk-taking, and in any innovation there is risk-taking, it becomes so costly that you cannot afford to do it in Europe, and you have to do the most innovative experiments outside Europe. And so these are the sort of things I'm thinking of. So it is not I'm not questioning the recently adopted digital legislation at EU level. I'm questioning the going over the top and the risk advertisement when implementing it, and basically when one is trying to avoid any risk taking, because you are not going to innovate if you forbid people to take risks or if you make it too costly to take risks.
Svetlana, that's your baby.
When we're speaking about startups and scale-ups and why they move out, I actually think I agree the risk averseness in the EU is generally different compared to, for instance, the UK, China, or other countries in Asia or the US, especially when it comes to additional investments and to more riskier investments. But then what I've said at the beginning is like there is a regulatory solution that could be offered. Like we're speaking here about entities that don't have a proper legal definition. They're not part of the legal framework. And that's why sometimes like having acknowledged the risk averseness, which is very different, and knowing that Europe is more or less used to working a bit more stricter regulations, we definitely need to include them as part of the legal definition. So once this is done, the investors, probably especially the private sector, would be feeling a bit more secure to put money into something which is legally defined. I mean, it's just a due diligence checklist sometimes where investors could not give access to funding to those innovative entrepreneurial projects simply because they don't exist in the legal entity. So what I'm saying is what you've described is definitely the complexity of the problem. But I'm trying to look at it from the basic perspective of what are the steps, what are the simplest steps we can resolve. And after we've done that, we're probably going to be facing a little less challenges in that perspective. So that's what we're working on at the moment in the Parliament. Of course, it's important to understand that we're not going to build new sector in the European economy just relying on public or EU money. Like that's not how it works. No. But it is a needed security. We need the policy and we need the commitment of some of the EU funding in a specific direction, because that gives the safety net and that gives the signal of where the private investment should be going. That's how it's structured, not only in the EU, but like elsewhere in the world. So we're not going to be using only public, but it is necessary to be strategically distributed at this point to ensure that the private flows are going to go in this direction. And one more sentence on AI. It's a big topic. It's very debated still. But I completely agree with what has been mentioned, human oversight. Like, we're not talking about a technology that's going to completely substitute us as an active part of specific professions or occupations in the labor market, but it's definitely going to change the job description of the people who are there. So there are new qualities that people would need to be enabling those technologies. Like, let's not fight or be scared of the technologies, but let's try to look at the skill set we need to start embedding into the education system, into the university system, like give some guidance in terms of what jobs would be needed in order to use this technology to the best and the most efficient way, rather than trying to go under the premise that AI is going to take away jobs. It's not. It's just going to change the job description.
Patty, can I just add one very short point on this? Because you were talking about competitiveness and how we define competitiveness, and that it sometimes gets very fuzzy and very difficult and very, very different meaning for very different people. But in this case, we need to understand that AI competitiveness or AI sovereignty is actually broader than just competing. It is actually regaining our own sovereignty and ownership also of data. We have to understand that 60% of European data, if not more, is owned elsewhere. Now, Trump, if he decided one day to just obliterate European data because he doesn't believe that we exist anyway, as in the same way that he's done for climate data, he could. He could put pressure on companies that are in the United States to get rid of our data. So this sovereignty issue is beyond just competitiveness. In this particular instance, it's actually a societal issue, and it's standing up for European pride, dignity, and our own data, and trying to bring our data back. And I think that's a fundamental way of rethinking about this AI digital competitiveness with the United States.
I think it's a very good point. Can I ask Maria maybe to come in on another issue which comes out of the working conditions report, which I thought was particularly interesting, and that's the business of working offline, working from home, and the changing nature of the workspace in effect because of that, and what sort of implications that has for us.
Yeah, but I would like to get back to maybe also the bigger digital issue at the workplace. So if we start there, I mean, the way that we engage with digital devices in the workplace, like it's across the board, and more than 60% of workers actually do it on a daily basis. I think the worrying trend in this, and here I would like to talk about the worrying trend, is that distribution is very unequal across the member states. Of course, because the economic sectors are different, but as we are in a fairly rapid digital transition, we clearly see that the engagement with the digital devices at the workplace. In Sweden, it's more than 90%, and in Romania, it's 50%. Of course, the economies are not the same, but that tells you about where the starting point is right now when we get AI on top of it. And that's, I think, really something that we need to take care of. And we combine this with looking at the basic digital skills. Here again, we see that while the population in general is on average, getting a higher level of basic digital skills, there is a big divergence going on as well across Europe, meaning that some member states are increasing the basic digital skills in their population. Some countries are definitely not, and they're going the other way. And that, I think, for the future of Europe in terms of the digital transition is a very worrying and salient fact that we get out of the various work that we've been doing at Eurofound. Another salient information that we've picked out of the European working conditions is that and this is 24, and because it's moving so fast, one can take this data as you want, but about 16% of workers in Europe in 24 were engaging with AI in one shape or form, okay, in different ways. A lot of them were younger men. Okay, so here we get the gender aspect, and either because women don't know, they're not in the positions. So you were talking about the younger men and how we need to create a space for them. they are also the ones now that are engaging with AI. They're making themselves redundant at the end of the day. Who knows? But so that's, I think, is. But it's also a thing of saying it's also an indication of where AI, what workplaces AI is being introduced in, as a front runner. It's mostly in financial services and then transport and storage, which is already highly digitalized workplaces. And then we get to the AM, so where you said the monitoring at the workplaces, okay? And I think a very interesting result we have is that even in the workplaces where the processes have been automatized to a certain extent, workers do not necessarily report that their work has become more monotonous. And I think that's very interesting, meaning that you can actually automatize processes and work without rendering it too autonomous, because that decreases motivation and engagement and productivity. So I think there's a lot of data in there. We need to understand better exactly what this means and how this comes around. But some of these results on the surface makes us think that you can digitalize the workplace. In some circumstances, we also see that stress increases, so there is an impact in the way that people work. But on the other some of the other factors where we thought it would have a negative impact, we see less of it. And I think that's really interesting and something we need to dig into. But for me, the red flag here is clearly the divergence that we are observing across the European Union in terms of the uptake and in terms of the developments of the digital skills.
You talk about findings on monotony. There was one figure that struck me particularly in the report, was that the level of monotony in work was increasing. Now, it may not be so in the context of AI, but I wanted to come to the issue of alienation of workers, because I think that's one of the interesting aspects of the definition of job quality evolving with concern like issues about engagement, autonomy, intensity of work, about how workers perceive their own role in organizations. And at root, a lot of that is about ownership and control. And I wondered if this was an area that Therese, you would feel comfortable with Eurofound writing about and producing research material on, because it does sort of question the basic model of ownership, and it does push towards a different vision of the way society should be organized.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because I see this rather as a trend for greater empowerment rather than and we are in economies, the more the economy becomes sophisticated and high-end products and services, the more you need to have workers' empowerment. So I don't see this as a threat. That being said, of course, the employers and the management in a company continues to have certain responsibilities that they are liable for, so that they need to have ultimate control and power of decision. But you can organize things in a way which empower people. Last remark on this, we also must not be naive. There will always be jobs in which there are unpleasant tasks to do. I mean, going back to the care sector, taking care of old people with dementia is pretty difficult. And so what I like about the Eurofound work on this is that they make this correlation between empowerment tools, which help workers to be equipped with the skills to deal with these difficult situations. And so it's a dynamic way of looking at the notion of empowerment, and which fully respects the roles and responsibilities of everyone.
it's about control too.
No, I think you have to look at different. That's why I said it's a different thing that happens in a warehouse.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a warehouse and you have artificial intelligence, you essentially become the robot yourself. You're just being told, go there, go A, B, C, D, boom, boom, boom. Have you been to a warehouse? You will notice this. Same thing if you talk with people doing transport things, transport workers. Many of them will be their life will be adjusted by a screen. So I think for that group, yes, definitely alienation, and there are potentially other groups as well. And then there are other groups, just as you said, Therese, that will be liberated. I think I belong to one of those groups because I'm using artificial intelligence sometimes, and it makes me much more productive, to be honest. But
your speech today wasn't AI generated.
No. It's I don't know what is the opposite of artificial intelligence. It's very human. I would doubt that there was intelligence involved, though. No, so it depends a lot, and I think that's important going forward. Addressing these issues is that it will have these effects for certain groups, and I think it's important to address that.
I want to bring in the audience. I don't know if there are questions from the floor. My eyesight is terrible, so if you're interested in putting it
right over there.
Right. Yes, please.
Yep.
Oh wow.
Just need to turn it on.
Very advanced.
There's one coming over now.
Thank you, Paddy, for giving me the floor, and a very interesting discussion indeed. I think it was Maria who said, Maria Jepsen, that 18% of workers fare really bad in terms of job quality. My name is Georgi Gotev. I'm from EU Alive. And I wonder, how does this translate in political terms? I mean, we know that in all European countries there are extremist movements, far-right movements, neo-Nazi, sometimes black blocs. We have seen violent scenes in Paris, for example. I mean, is there a sense of correlation between those 18% of workers that fare really bad and the fact that we have in our societies such groups of people? And my question goes to, I think, all of you, because you represent various stakeholders and you may have various opinions. Thank you.
Maria, do you want to?
I would guess so. And I mean, our data does not allow us to kind of make that correlation, okay? Because we don't know. We simply don't know from our data. But if we have 18% of workers who have, in relative terms, bad working conditions on all the 7 dimensions, they're low-skilled, they're younger, they're in very specific sectors, and their prospects of moving out of that is not very bright, then yes, you would get reactions back because you could say that the society is not providing the opportunities in terms of being able to move forward. When we look into other branches of research, we do also identify pockets of the population, low-skilled, single mothers and so forth, where they are stuck in dire situations, and the mobility out of that situation is basically impossible. Now, that you would expect such a situation to give a response in political terms, right? To vote against or other actions. But we don't have the kind of data that can link this way. What we do have data on is in terms of trust. And here we do see that about 20, in most member states, we have about 20% of the populations that have a great mistrust in establishment, whatever, like being it the health system, being it the government, being it the EU, media, and so forth, that have a great mistrust in the system per se, and hence their participation is very difficult.
Sandrine.
Yeah, I think there are a series of compound factors. I don't think we can just say that it's the 18%. I think there's a variety of shifts in our society which have enabled for this disgruntlement and this disenfranchisement to just take the fore. Part of it is the disenfranchisement of rural communities. There's a big difference between rural and urban communities that encroaches. There's also a big issue around dignity, fairness, and pride. I mean, the fairness element, we often talk about the Gilets jaunes. The Gilets jaunes were not riots just because the price of diesel went up. They were riots because the week before the wealth tax had been obliterated. So it's that disparity between, you can have a bad quality job or not feel fulfilled in your job, but if on top of it, the wealthiest of your society are not paying their taxes, there is not proper wealth distribution, and you're continuously seeing inflation, then you start to see that there's growing distrust and growing disenfranchisement. So I think there are a variety of different factors, and we have to take these factors into account as we move forward and put in place the right regulatory structures, but also, as I keep on saying, deeply understanding where is our economy. Our economy functions in terms of shareholder value. It is driven by shareholders overall. It is over-financialized. Look at the statistics. You can fire 10,000 people and your shares go up. You do not take into consideration the firing of those 10,000 people in terms of the economic costs. So there needs to be a shift in terms of the way in which the economy functions as well.
Yeah, so just so there are at least 2 research reports that I know of that go straight in this. There's one French research report that clearly reports that if you are in a group that Maria would describe as precarious or so on, you're much more likely to vote for Le Pen. It's also a German report study that illustrates more or less the same thing. So the conditions play a role. And I can say in my own very personal experience, because I did an awful lot of trade union work in Sweden, visiting with groups. And I particularly remember one meeting with a group of cleaners, and I think none of them were of Swedish origin. But they were very concerned about the migrant policies, and they were intending to vote for the far-right party, even though because they were afraid that their jobs were at stake. So there is a material side to it as well, what is happening. So it's not just ideas. I'm not saying that you're saying that, by the way, but it's material and it's also ideas. But I'm sure there is a material factor to it as well that we're discussing today.
There's a question back there.
Thank you. I would like first to congratulate Eurofound and all the speakers. I'm the executive director of the European Drugs Agency. Talking about care and societal dimension of what we are discussing today. I think the care example mentioned by Maria Jepsen is very important, because today what we see is a not so hidden process of total privatization of health in Europe. So what we see in many countries, those countries where the very important health sector, if you really want to be treated, if you have an illness, you will wait for months, if not for years. And if you have the money and you can go to a private system, then so for me the question is, it's important. I fully support everything that was said, but I think in particular the fact that we need to bring also update the project for society, because it's not. If you look into the city of Brussels, I think there is only one public hospital. All the others, if you are in the ambulance, they will ask you if you have a social security, and if not, maybe they will send you to that hospital. And you cannot measure the health and the well-being of the population only on the basis of the return on investment. Mm-hmm. And in some hospitals, in some countries, like in France, but also Belgium, you have the medical desert, because nobody wants to go to work in very difficult working conditions in some difficult places in those countries. And you see a bit everywhere in Europe after the COVID pandemic, you have entire intensive care units that remain closed. And they are not remaining closed because there is no money to make them work. It's because people have massively left that area after the COVID, because the working condition, and it's impacting essentially women working in that industry, if I can call it an industry, it's the huge impact. So I think we have choices for the society. We have seen the last 20 years, disinvestment in justice, in health, and in some cases in school, in education. Now we have increased with drugs problem with competitiveness, plenty of things. The state is weaker, our public services are weaker, and now the EU needs to cut to reimburse 800 billions for the COVID loan, and we need also to invest at least, Mrs. von der Leyen announced, 800 billion estimated for the defense effort we need to sustain. So where are there going to be cuts in the budgets in the EU and the member states? It will be the health and social budgets. So we need, if we care about our competitiveness, if we care about our people, we need to have a project for society. If not, others will do.
Can I come from that question to Therese and say, you were shaking your head when you were when the values of our society were being described as shareholder-driven, and surely the way we treat care workers, the way we pay care workers, is a reflection of precisely that our society's values are upside down.
I was not shaking my head on the values, but on that we are purely driven of shareholder values. This is simply not true. This is totally disregarding the fact that there are millions of companies who are not even on stock markets. So millions of entrepreneurs who every day wake up very early in the morning, putting at risk their own house, their own health, and everything in order to create jobs in non-listed companies.
But they don't have the power.
They have the power at their level. They have the power over the destiny of their company. They have a certain number of powers. So I think we need to have a much more nuanced discussion on those issues. Otherwise, we will simply be opposing each other instead of trying to look at, in a nuanced way, what are the solutions we can put in place. Going back to the care issue, which is a very important one. Luckily, in Europe, even if things are not perfect, we still have, in many, many countries, a system where people have very decent care in public hospitals. It does not mean that the private sector does not have to play a role and that there is no legitimate role for them, but this can go hand in hand. The private sector, the public sector can complement each other. And at the end of the day, for the public sector, it is true that someone has to pay. Either it is the taxpayers' money which will finance it, or there will be other ways, or there will be inflation, or there will be... But someone at the end will have to pay for the public goods provided by the public service. So that's why it's important that those public goods are organized in an efficient way and are value for money. And if you want to minimize the risks of ending up with the wrong way of paying for it, you need to create the conditions for a growing economy, because the best way to reimburse public debt is to reimburse it with economic growth that will generate more economic value. And that's an element which I wanted to bring into the discussion today, because I think it's an important element.
Yes, Klaus Michael, sorry.
I think there's a connection, an important connection also to other issues we've been discussing here. So some things we are doing because we want to make profit, because we think the business model is a good way of doing it. But there are also other things that we do because we're humans. So we don't necessarily put our kids in school because it's because of profit reasons, or people are getting old, and we don't do that, treat them because of But what we do see, and I have a long experience of dealing with this in my native Sweden doing collective bargaining, that is that you have a lot of women ending up in sectors and branches of the economy that is not truly run by market forces. And that is one of the problems, and I think that's where it's tapping into a very important discussion beyond GDP and so on, because many of these jobs will never be competitive in the profit sense of things, and I think that's an important element of this discussion as well.
Did you want to add something? No? Okay. Is it there? Okay.
Thank you. Tadas Leonchuk, I'm heading employment unit in Eurofound. And now I think the panel has gravitated towards one topic which I think is worth spelling out, naming in regard to European competitiveness. A lot of people in the world from beyond Europe see as part of European competitiveness the public services. And I think many of you alluded now to that. And Eurofound has done some work on public services, particularly in relation to trust. Trust in institutions is highly correlated with perceived quality of services. And this should not be forgotten. Also, I hope with the next year's European Quality of Life Survey, we will renew data on the topic. And why it is important? It is important because trust fundamentals go beyond the situation at one's work. They go a lot about perception of access to services. And payment cost situations, of course, European countries have many different approaches to that, but the perception of being able to receive services is an important driver we shouldn't forget. And one of perspectives we in Eurofound can take on that with your support, with your guidance, advice, is also identifying the sectors that play role in providing those services. In current circumstances, though, it's clearly beyond social services, narrowly understood. There are services of general interest that relate to infrastructure, such as provision of water, electricity, and so on. Disrupting those can be very painful for many groups in society beyond the traditionally perceived vulnerable groups. And the last point about social cohesion of our societies, clearly economic foundations, economic vulnerability is a factor in driving lack of trust, disappointment, and dissatisfaction in society. But as colleagues from Fundamental Rights Agency researching xenophobia can tell, there's no society having immunity against intolerance. And these types of problems are not limited to the economically vulnerable populations. These are broader issues we have to address. Thanks.
We're beginning to run out of time, so I'd like an indication if there's any more speakers from the floor. Okay, I'll take a question there before I go back to the panel.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I won't take too long. Just a quick question. I think the job quality discussion was a lot around the regulation. But what about social dialogue in collective bargaining, in achieving job quality, right?
Are there any other questions from the floor? No, we'll take one here, and then I'll go back to the panel for there.
Michael Freitag, WC Europe. I just want to flag one element which is important to reconcile flexibility on labor markets, both for workers and companies, because we are very often falling into the trap of attributing flexibility only for companies, but there are more and more workers who also want flexible forms of work, and I was saying agency work, which is one important form of flexibility, but not the only one. So my question would be to Klaus-Peter and to Therese, how can we make sure that flexibility works for both sides?
Flexibility. Right, okay, we'll come back. And first, Therese, maybe you answer the question about social dialogue. When I came here, I was told that you guys were barely speaking to each other, and and there does appear to be problems with the Porto process, and there are different, really quite sharp differences between the two organisations. And it must make it very difficult for Eurofound to function at all if indeed you're not talking to each other.
We are talking a lot to each other. The Porto process is not the social dialogue. The Porto process is the political process driven by governments. It's about policy making as driven by governments. And of course we are consulted. But when we talk of social dialogue, we talk of all bilateral negotiations without any presence of public authorities. And when we discuss basically how to best reconcile companies' and workers' needs and shape working conditions in companies across Europe. There is a lot of collective bargaining and social dialogue that is happening throughout Europe at various levels, in companies, at regional level, at sectoral level, at national level. There is also European social dialogue at the European level. And there we try and focus on issues on which we think that at the European level, the social partners can bring added value. So it's usually broad principles on how to guarantee certain rights for workers. It can be also policy declaration making recommendations jointly on how to address a specific issue. And we are, for the moment, engaged in a discussion to define what will be the next work program of our social dialogue at the European level in the next 2 to 3 years, because we try and organize our work in order to agree in advance what are the key challenges on which we want to work together. And it is certain that in that context, one of the key elements we have in mind in our discussions is how can we contribute to helping to create the conditions that will maximize the creation of quality jobs in Europe. So that's our compass. Concerning the labour market flexibility question of our colleague, it is indeed a need both for companies and for workers. And the issue is, how do you reconcile and make sure that the flexible working solutions that are put in place in companies are actually fitting both the workers and the employers' needs? And that is why it's important that in the framework conditions that we set at European level, we leave sufficient empowerment for the workers and the employers concerned at local level to be able to find and devise their own solutions, because there are a variety of companies' needs, there are a variety of workers' needs, and there is simply not one-size-fits-all solution across Europe. So labour market flexibility and the flexibility of rules that are devised at EU level is a big concern for Business Europe, because we think this is necessary to empower local employers and local workers to basically agree on how to organize their interaction their daily interaction in an efficient way.
So the right to hire and fire is not defining the relationship between you. The social dialogue is good and can be productive, you're saying.
The right to hire and fire is not an issue on which the EU can legislate. So at the European level, no, we don't discuss this.
Yeah, so I was thank you for bringing the social dialogue dimension up here. I think it's a very important one, and I want to echo what Therese said. We're in negotiations now on a new social dialogue work program. There is boxing, there is dancing. I think it's important to separate the two. There will be an awful lot of boxing when it comes to what the legislator, what the European Parliament, what the Commission and the Council, what they intend to do. We don't always agree. But then when it comes to the social dialogue, that's where we try to identify joint challenges, joint problems, and also to identify joint solutions to those issues. And I think that there we're having a bit of a dancing right now. And social dialogue is a very underestimated legislative method at European level. It's a great tool because I do believe that we are the buyers and the sellers of labor. We know the market. We know it better than anyone else, better than the legislators, and of course we should have a key role in defining these conditions. We will not always agree on things for sure, but
flexibility is not an issue.
No, it depends on what flexibility we are talking about.
It's like competitiveness.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to build on a few points on the intolerance point. I fully agree. I mean, intolerance has gone up across the society, and we barely talked about the role of media, which really has created greater distrust, greater frustration, rather than the reverse. And I think that we really need to think through what does that mean within a European context, because it is absolutely splitting apart the United States. The other point that I want to come in is that let's try to move forward in a European way. I love the analogy of the dancing. Let's try to dance together more. Let's try to imagine and dream together more, bringing all sides of our society. And I bring this up really as a plea, because right now we have so many knee-jerk reactions to the conflict that we're seeing in Ukraine, to the conflict in Gaza, to the United States in particular. So we can't lose sight of our way. And our way is to ensure that we continue to be tolerant. When I was chairing the Economic and Societal Impacts of Research and Innovation for DG Research and Innovation, coming out of COVID, we also talked about, and the word services was mentioned. We have to extend the understanding of services. A university offers a service during COVID. It actually did in terms of trying to work with students. There are ways in which we need to innovate our services. There are ways in which we need to innovate our job market. But we've barely talked about science and innovation here, which is fundamental to the way in which we move forward. Again, in terms of the scale-ups and startups, et cetera. So that comes into the fifth freedom, which is also something that we're speaking about at the European level. So I don't want to leave with this idea that there was too much friction in the conversation. I actually feel that the tension is healthy, but let's make sure that we don't forget the European way as we move forward. There are still so many benefits to the European way, and that's what we need to hold on to, because it is under attack.
Maria.
No, getting back to the collective bargaining, social dialogue, and the European way. So also when we look at workers, actually 80% of workers in the European Union have some kind of collective representation at their workplace, or have a meeting or space where they can actually talk about the work organization. I think that's really important, that we have 80% of the workplaces where there is this possibility. Now, what's the result of that? That we don't really know, but still, that also means that 20% of the workers, they don't have any possibility of actually voicing concerns or being represented in one way or the other. And that dovetails back to my 18% that I raised in the beginning. And I think that the fact that we have these 80% of workers actually having some kind of collective representation or being able to engage into meetings where they can discuss their work is an enabling factor. Right? It's an enabling factor for actually getting the job quality that we have in Europe. And that's how this workplace level representation actually feeds into like the sectoral level, into the national level and European level at the same time. And that, I think, is a very European way. As Esther Lynch said in the movie that we just saw before, like, you know, we do actually have a very European way of doing it, and that's tripartism. But it's also having the social partners at the workplace. The problem, so I said that 20% of workers do not have this possibility, but of course, again, it's not distributed equally across sectors, across countries, and so forth. So the 80% is really on the average, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of ensuring that there are these possibilities at the company level across the sectors and across the countries.
I'll be very brief at the end because we're also running out of time, but I'm happy that after an hour and a half conversation, the first time the word cohesion was mentioned was in the Q&A session actually, and this is key from the very beginning of our conversation as well. It was mentioned in light of social cohesion, but I would also argue that economic cohesion is as important as it is for what we are discussing here for the last hour and a half. So that's very important. We shouldn't be forgetting it. And just a brief comment on the social dialogue. It's key, it's important. Like, we value it a lot from a regulatory perspective, but we also want to make the note that it should be constructive. Like, just saying that something is not working, we have to completely change it. It's not helpful for anyone. Yes, we have to reform. We have to make some things more efficient, but let's not banish everything that we have created as a base simply because there is an unprecedented or challenging situation at the moment with like disruptive technology or driven by a geopolitical situation. So constructive means properly analyzing everything we have currently existing as a framework and seeing where we have to adapt and reform to answer to the current challenges and disruptions that we might be facing. And yes, science and research, I wish we spoke more about that innovation, but I'm sure this is an ongoing debate and conversation, so we're going to have more opportunities. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring the discussion to a conclusion. Thank the panelists for their contributions. Broad brush, it's very difficult to become too specific in a short space of time, but I think it reflected importantly on the work being done by Eurofound at this moment in the organisation's history. So thank you very much indeed.
I also want to thank the panelists, and until you take your places back on the first row, just to tell that, I mean, we just witnessed a masterclass of social dialogue, and I'm very happy that this is the background of Eurofound, actually. We are one of the only tripartite agencies in Europe, and you see that brings lots of value to the agency because, I mean, this type of conversations very much inspire our research afterwards, and the results of the research are very much consulted and balanced with the participation of the social partners, but also working with the Commission, with the European Parliament, with our stakeholders. So I really appreciate this very good discussion. There might be some differences, but if there are no differences, then it would be very worrying. I think what is very important is that we have the sense of common purpose, and you have seen this in the conversation of the panel. Yes, there might be different solutions. I'm not sure that the chicken and egg example is the best one. I mean, there is appreciation, of course, of job quality, competitiveness, etc., etc. I think they have to go together. I mean, chicken and egg do not go together sometimes, but the solutions of these issues could go together, and this is going to benefit very much each of them. And this is an example for many other also areas where in the world of work or in the social cohesion and the social area, it's very important to work together with all the stakeholders. And this is very particular to the European model that we all say that we would like to preserve. And again, one more thing that was mentioned by Maria and by other colleagues, it's very important to look beyond the average numbers. Very often, I mean, we present as any research body, we present many average numbers. And we see some trends, in this case, I mean, speak about job quality, etc., they are positive. But at the same time, I would very much go back to the question of Georgi Gotev here. What happens with this, okay, decreasing, but probably in more troubles part of people that have a discontent at work, discontent with using public services, discontent with different issues. So if we want to have a continuous advancement and increase of wealth, we need political stability. And political stability means indeed to target these groups that are the most vulnerable, and that if they see themselves nailed in a particular situation without any chance to move on, then you can expect some developments that are not exactly called political stability. And this is also very much seen in the research that we are doing, and also on the trust questions that we are asking. Speaking about the public dialogue and social dialogue between workers, employers, and I would include also the civil society, there is a very important institution here in Europe, which is the European Economic and Social Committee, which exactly brings together these three groups: workers, employers, and civil society, discussing commonly important problems. They are one of the two consultative bodies, so they have opinions, they can influence legislation, and they are, I think, together with the Committee of the Regions, one of the very valuable platforms where you can see this exactly European model of inclusiveness, having the different partners participate. We at Eurofound, we are very happy that we have a very good cooperation with the Economic and Social Committee. We have a number of joint initiatives. We contribute to some of them with their opinions. We provide expertise on topics that the Economic and Social Committee is requesting. We sometimes organize, I have in mind some joint events targeting neighboring and candidate countries, which are extremely important for them. So there is quite a lot of cooperation going on between Eurofound and the Economic and Social Committee, and I'm very happy that we have today here somebody who knows not only very well the Economic and Social Committee, because he is for a long time the chair of the civil society group there, but who also in the next days is going to become the president of the Economic Social Committee over the next term. And we are very much looking forward to continue this very good cooperation. With this, I would pass the floor to Seamus Boland, and thank you very much for your presence, Seamus. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Calvin Di Rivalio. Thank you also, colleagues from Eurofound, which I know is a lot of it is based in Dublin, I'm glad to say, being Irish. So that's a nice underpinning of what I want to say to you today. As Director Calvin has said, there is huge cooperation between the Economic Social Committee and Eurofound, and that has been, I suppose, through the. We're a little older. I think you're 50 years of age. I think we celebrated 60 something, nearly just recently. So we've paralleled a long time together, and as you say, when you think of the makeup of the European Economic Social Committee, I'd like to call it civil society, because trade unions, employers, and of course civil society organizations make up civil society. And without the unique trust of each of those three groupings, I think civil society is left in a very poor place. And I don't think, frankly, any government can survive without some cohesion and acknowledgement of the work they do. And I always give the example of the Ukraine war. When it broke out, suddenly, at least in our committee, I saw members from all three groupings come together to bring help and services, if you remember, in the first days of that war. And, you know, you had employers making sure that there was infrastructure, whether it was lorries, etc., you know, whatever, to bring goods to Ukraine. You had workers, you know, working around the clock in order to collect the material, etc., and of course civil society turning up at the coalface without any thought, almost for their own safety. So I think the need to understand that is not at all out there. And unfortunately, when I hear ideologues, especially from the far right, talking about defunding these areas, as has happened in the United States and is happening more so. We have to ask ourselves and reflect, what exactly, why can anybody say that this part of our society should be undermined, defunded, or simply taken out? And when I have to tell this story. Sorry, Sylvia, who is there with me to keep an eye on me. Thank you, Sylvia. But I do tell this story where I met some patriot people in the airport recently, and they heard I was from that obnoxious grouping, civil society organizations, you know, those NGOs and those terrible people that should be wiped off the face of the earth. And I said to them, okay, so you don't like us. No, we do not like you. No, you're dangerous. Okay, I said, okay, I worked with children, with young people in difficulties. I worked with people with disabilities, older people. I now work with rural disadvantaged groups. You don't like them. We were not saying that. But I said, you don't like civil society organizations, and they do work with people with disabilities. They do work with people who need services, health, etc., on a daily basis. Oh, no, we're not talking about them. Isn't that interesting? Here is a group of people dedicated to the basically disestablishment of anybody working in civil society, and that includes employers and unions, as well as organizations. And they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, that's their failure, but it's also our failure, because we need to be able to say what we're talking about. And one of the most interesting things that came out of that debate here this morning was, and I would gently say to Eurofound and everybody else, don't exclude civil dialogue from social partnership. Don't, please, because that cohesion is required for all three sectors. And if you don't have that cohesion, then you have what is happening at the moment in Europe. You have the attraction of working class areas, people who are marginalized, as I think one of the panelists was suggesting. They are suddenly attracted to that kind of ideologue, which in fact will cause enormous suffering to most of those people. And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves. So in that dance that I think Sandrine was so, and my ETOC colleague, sorry, I want all of civil society to be in that dance, or in that boxing match, whichever suits. Because if we alienate what we call the groups on the margins, then we alienate everybody. And when you think about, I heard in that discussion, and I am really taken by that excellent discussion, so well done for the panel you organized, excellent panel. A lot of talk about the care economy, and I wrote it down because my organization in Ireland is very much involved in delivering care in rural areas. So it's a major issue because, of course, delivering care in rural areas is not profitable. Everybody knows that, and yet you have to do it. So how do you do it? So the rather simple solution, but too simple, was that the care economy, somebody said, again, who has the power in our society? Well, not the care economy, because most of the care economy are not unionized, therefore are not in social partnership, therefore are underpaid, therefore are, and we had some strikes in Ireland recently where people working in education and health, funded by a thing called, you don't need to know this, but Section 39, my Eurofound colleagues will know this. Section 39 was a kind of well, we don't really want to mainstream this group of workers, but we have to sort them out somewhere, so they will be employed by a civil society organization who, have lesser labor standards, lesser pay. So that percentage of the workforce is increasing, so hence the strikes in Ireland, which I'm glad to say may yield the kind of conditions that they should be on, similar to the conditions of any other public sector worker. So that's an interesting development in the way we manage to say, answer the question which somebody again asked, what's in it for us? And that's what people who are looking at the debates at the moment on ideologies, right-wing or even left-wing, they're asking, well, what's in it for us? Can Trump give us more than they're giving us? Can Farage give us more than they're giving us? I think they're getting the wrong answer, because we in civil society, and I'm talking about the broad, need to up our game in terms of what we are saying should be in it for us. So when we talk about the debate of over-regulation, interesting debate, most of civil society looking at the debate don't really understand it. They don't understand it. If you're a farmer, you regard regulation as a disaster, yet it can be your saving. And same in industry. Over-regulation can be seen as something oppressive. Nobody talks about the benefits, why it's necessary, why jobs can be protected, why digitalization can be managed. So that's a challenge. And I think it's a challenge for Eurofound and for our committee to try and come up with some answers that this time talk the language of public discourse, which is now dominated by the right-wing ideologue. And look around Europe. Look at Germany, look at Italy, look at the Netherlands. Look around. There is a lot of that dialogue now there. And I don't think we're there with the same cleverness, with the same ability at explaining what we were hearing on this panel this morning. I commend Eurofound for a lot of things, your dedication to the whole jobs, workers, conditions, your dedication to coming up with report after report that supports the kind of thing our committee, indeed if you look at the opinions produced by the European Economic Social Committee, they are very similar to the reports you have produced, which are about dealing with marginalization, which are about dealing with anti-poverty, which are about dealing with people who for various reasons have not managed to get into the space where they can look after themselves because of, it could be disability, lack of opportunity in the education world, lack of opportunity because of circumstances. I know about that because I'm one person that left school at 13. But the idea that I am a great example is not a good one. I just kind of got lucky. But most people don't get that lucky. And unfortunately, if you leave school at 13, there is the evidence, even by Eurofound itself, and by a whole range of think tank organizations, the evidence is very clear. 90% of people who leave school at that age end up in poverty. That's the evidence. So it doesn't matter how good they are, bright they are, clever they are, whatever. They don't make it because, funny enough, the regulation comes against them. I remember I applied for a job, but I didn't do a leaving cert in Ireland. I was well qualified in other ways, but because I didn't do that, I couldn't even apply for the job. So sometimes the regulation can also push people who are already on the margins even further into the margins. So we have to be really careful about the dance and the boxing match we heard about earlier. We really have to manage that as such a way. And I work with young people similar to me over the years. And, you know, I've had great pleasure in meeting some people that we got into that space. But we did it almost against the various regulations already negotiated. We basically found ways around. It shouldn't be like that. So we are challenged with how we do that. And we have to start talking like this in the wider public discourse, instead of killing ourselves about paragraph 5, law 6, all of that. That doesn't make any sense. Unfortunately, it allows the others to say whatever they like. And if it's populist, it works. We know that poverty is an issue. And by the way, we have to keep saying this too, before I do a little bit of critical analysis. We have to keep saying Europe as a model is probably the only model in the world that actively fights against poverty. Think about it. Most ceilings or most floor for people who will fall through the various systems are probably in Europe. So we need to start saying that, because in the Brexit referendum, even the pro-Brexiteers were apologizing for Europe. Oh, well, we know Europe is not, but, sorry, Europe is. I mean, if you're apologizing for your colleague's ability on the, let's say, the stage or the football field, well, everybody else thinks they're probably poor as well. So you put them at a disadvantage. So we need to say that. But poverty is an issue. And the great challenge now, looking forward, is will we Europeans manage to deal with the challenges that are now in front of us with defence? Will we manage that challenge while at the same time making sure we don't diminish the social pillar, the social rights, the conditions, and the measures against poverty? Will we end up reducing a whole range of budgets that are the foundation of why Europe exists? They are the foundation of why Europe exists. Will we manage to do that? If we do, well then we are losing the only reason Europe exists. And that's a very great challenge. I do welcome President von der Leyen's statement this year regarding anti-poverty strategy. I do welcome her approach to dealing with the budget in defence and the budget for other areas. But I think it would be foolish to stand here and say that that is not something we should take for granted. In terms of Eurofound and our committee going forward, I hope and I know that cooperation will continue as strong as it ever has. I know that we will put conditions in terms of workers, we will put conditions in terms of people on the margins at the forefront. And we will also ensure that the economy, particularly the discussion on competitiveness and competition, which I was very taken by your panelists, are taken seriously. Because obviously, this continent, this union, needs to economically be strong. So it can't ignore the realities of dealing with internal competition and external competition. So that dance and that boxing match also needs to happen, big time. Because without that, we don't have an economy, we don't have the money to do anything. I'll finish with saying this, that yes, I think it says designate, so I'm not there yet. But I do hope to bring to the European Economic Social Committee something where I've been all my life, fighting anti-poverty, fighting for better conditions, fighting for better human rights. I hope, I'm too old to change, so that's where I'm going to be. So you're going to have to put up, if you listen to me again, with that kind of language. I hope you're enjoying this conference. I thank the organizers for inviting me. It's been an honor, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you very much, Seamus. I can't agree more with you when you said that instead of discussing legislation at large, something which is not our business. I mean, Eurofound is fortunately not in legislation, but it's very important to discuss what are the topics and what instrument you use to solve what problem. And to speak to also to the audience in order to have the feedback of the people affected from this, being businesses or workers or people in vulnerable situations. By the way, we keep working and will continue working with the civil society organizations when working and making research on people with disabilities, on the care workers, on the active market, labor market measures, how to involve more people to the labor market. Talking about the social security and the public services, we cooperate very largely with the civil society representatives, and that's why we are very happy to continue cooperating with the Economic and Social Committee. With this, I want to thank you, all of you, again, for taking part in our event. As you have seen, our 50th anniversary is quite based on the work we are doing, and we are happy with that, because this is what makes this great agency relevant. The participation of our stakeholders, the topics that we discuss. Probably at the panel you have seen many questions in the air. I can assure you that if you read Eurofound's research, you are going to find many answers to these questions. So this is what we try to do, an objective research, non-biased picture, what is the situation, and eventually where the attention should be focused more. And we will continue doing that. I would like to thank very much our stakeholders, the Commission's representatives that are here, and we are very happy working together with the Commission, our social partners, all of you are on our board, so all decisions about the work program and what Eurofound is exactly doing is very much decided by our management board. I would like also to thank two people that made this discussion today very interesting. Sandrine for the very good and I would say thought-provoking opening and very impressive also of the discussion, and Paddy for the very interesting panel and the very interesting debate. Thank you all for your participation. There are some light snacks outside and some coffee if you would like to stick around for a moment and have a chat with colleagues or among yourselves. You are very welcome. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.